There is something about the way olive trees grow that I have never been able to shake from my mind. They don't grow fast. They don't grow easy. They split open at the trunk sometimes, right down the middle, and somehow, they keep producing fruit. And I wonder today, as you pressed play on this video, whether that image means something to you right now. Because I think a lot of us are walking around split open, not broken in a way that the world would notice, not crying in public or falling apart at the seams in a way that anyone can see, but quietly on the inside, there is a crack that you've been carrying. And you've been wondering whether anything good can still come from a life that has been through this much pressure. I want to sit with you today beneath that image, beneath the ancient, gnarled, enduring olive tree of Bethlehem, and I want to talk about love. Not romantic love, though that may be part of your story. Not love as a feeling that comes and goes with the seasons of your emotions, but love as the most grounding, most persistent, most quietly powerful force that has ever moved through human history. And the reason I chose Bethlehem, that ancient, small, overlooked town, is because love chose it first. Before any empire did, before any poet wrote about it, before the shepherds ran through its fields in the middle of the night, love chose the smallest place on the map and said, "This is where I will make myself known." And I believe with everything in me that love is still doing that. Still choosing the smallest, most overlooked corners of people's lives. Still walking into the places where you said nothing significant could ever happen here. Still sitting down in the middle of your ordinary Tuesday and saying, "I have not forgotten you." I want you to hear that before we go any further. You have not been forgotten. Not by the God who breathed this world into existence, not by the love that was present before the foundations of the earth were laid, not in the middle of your quiet suffering, not in the middle of your confusion about where your life is going, not in the middle of the relationship that ended, or the prayer that hasn't been answered yet, or the dream that feels like it's been buried so long that even you've stopped believing it could resurrect. You have not been forgotten. And I think that is the first thing love always needs to say to a human heart before it can say anything else. Because we spend so much of our lives operating from a place of feeling invisible, feeling like we're doing all the right things and somehow still ending up at the back of the line, feeling like everyone else is receiving something that God seems to be withholding from us specifically. And I want to be careful here, because I am not standing in a pulpit pretending I have all the answers. I am a person who has sat in silence with my own questions. I am a person who has read scripture and then put the Bible down and looked at my ceiling and said, "But Lord, what about this part of my life that still doesn't make sense?" So when I talk to you today, I'm not talking from a place of having everything figured out. I'm talking from a place of having been through enough to know that love is more patient than I ever gave it credit for. And I want to start there, with patience, because I think we misunderstand patience deeply. We treat it like a waiting room, like some place you're forced to sit in while the real thing is happening somewhere else. We treat patience like it's passive, like it's doing nothing, like it's just the absence of progress. But the olive tree doesn't see it that way. An olive tree can take 40 years to reach full maturity, 40 years of roots going deeper than anyone can see, 40 years of the tree deciding, underground, in the dark, in the silence, how wide and how deep it is willing to go before it bears the kind of fruit that lasts. And in Romans chapter 5, Paul writes something that always stops me mid-breath. He talks about how suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And he says that hope does not put us to shame. Not because everything works out perfectly, not because the storm ends on our timeline, but because love has been poured into our hearts, not promised for later, poured in, already present, already there, right now in this season you're in, no matter how dry or confusing or grief-stained it feels. The love is already in you. And what I want you to wrestle with today is the possibility that this season you're in, this long, patient, underground season, is not the absence of love working. It is love working at its deepest level. You know, there is a woman in the book of Ruth whose story I have returned to more times than I can count. Her name is Naomi, and she had a life that by every visible measure had been taken apart piece by piece. She left her hometown with a husband and 2 sons, and she came back with nothing but a foreign daughter-in-law and a heart so full of grief that she told people to stop calling her by her name. She said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore. That name means pleasant. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." And what I love about that is the honesty of it. She didn't perform. She didn't paste a scripture verse over her pain and pretend it wasn't real. She named it. She stood in the middle of her community and said, "I came back empty." And I think that kind of honesty is the beginning of something, because love cannot fill a space that you're pretending isn't empty. Love works in the honest places. Love works in the spaces where you finally stop performing for God and for the people around you, and you just say, "I am not okay right now, and I don't know how this ends, but I am still here." And what happened for Naomi is that love showed up, not in a dramatic moment, not in a burning bush kind of revelation, but in the ordinary faithfulness of a young woman named Ruth, who said, "Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay." And I wonder whether you've been looking for love in the dramatic moments and missing it in the Ruth moments. Missing it in the friend who keeps checking on you even when you're not very good at responding. Missing it in the family member who doesn't understand your situation perfectly but loves you anyway. Missing it in the small grace of waking up this morning with breath in your lungs and enough to take one more step. Love is not always loud. In Bethlehem, the greatest love story ever told began in a feeding trough, not a palace, not a ceremony, not a moment that the political leaders of that era even noticed. The shepherds were the first to know. And the shepherds were the people that polite society decided didn't really count. They lived outside the city walls. Their testimony wasn't even admissible in a court of law in that culture. They were seen as unreliable, as rough, as too close to the soil and animals to be taken seriously. And yet, the angels showed up in their field first, not in the temple, not in the halls of Herod, in the field, in the night, among the people who had been told quietly and consistently that they were on the margins of what mattered. And I want to speak directly to you if you have spent years feeling like you are on the margins of what matters. If you grew up in a family where your voice was the last one anyone listened to, if you've been in churches or communities where you felt like love was conditional on your performance, your appearance, your ability to hold it all together, if you have ever sat in a room full of people and felt like you were the only one not in on something, I want you to hear this clearly. The angels went to the fields. God has always had a specific, almost stubborn tenderness for the ones that everyone else has overlooked. There is a psalm, the 34th, where David writes from a place of real desperation, real fear, real hiding, and in the middle of that, he says that God is close to the brokenhearted, not distant, not watching from a comfortable distance, close. The word in Hebrew carries the sense of nearness, of someone leaning in, and that image has stayed with me. This idea that the brokenness in your heart is something that pushes God away. It is something that draws him closer. Because love does not flinch from pain. Love leans towards it. And I know that might feel difficult to believe right now, because sometimes the pain has been so long and so patient in its own way that it's started to feel like the permanent state of things. Sometimes you've prayed until your words ran out, and the silence on the other side started to feel like an answer you didn't ask for. I want to sit in that with you for a moment, because I think we don't do that enough. We rush past the silence. We fill it with noise, with busyness, with another round of doing things to make ourselves feel productive enough to deserve the blessing we're waiting for. But there is something sacred in the sitting. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before his public ministry began. Not 40 days of preparation in the usual sense, not 40 days of planning or strategizing or building a following. 40 days of hunger and silence and being pressed on by everything the enemy could throw at him. And it was out of that emptied, wilderness-tested place that he stood up and said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," not despite the wilderness, because of what the wilderness revealed, because the wilderness showed what was really in him. And I wonder whether your wilderness is doing the same thing.